This is Endgame. I'm Amanda Cassett. This episode is with Kristin Smith, CEO of the Blockchain Association, a trade association which is slightly different but related to a lobbying group. We talk about everything tech people may not know about Washington, D.C. What is lobbying and why? How did crypto go from being bad to being good at it? And the realpolitik of what your company should be doing to defend its interests. Give it a watch or listen wherever you consume podcasts. So I'll start with, what is lobbying?
That's an excellent question. You know, in the United States, if you look at the First Amendment, there is a right to petition the government, and lobbyists and the art of lobbying is really a professionalized way of trying to petition the government, particularly Congress, but also often the White House and the agencies as well. And so, you know, just like if you need some work done on your house and maybe you need to call a professional roofer or something to repair the roof, lobbyists are just kind of that set of professionals that, you know, work on behalf of different interests in Washington. And so if you come to Washington and you look around town and you see the different offices, there are lobbyists for almost every cause. Some lobbyists don't like to use the word lobbyist; they like to use the word advocate. But it's all kind of the same thing. It's somebody who is working to advance an issue, and it can often be done in an amateur capacity as well. You know, anyone can come to Washington and go up to the Hill and spend a day to sort of lobby their congressman to take action in a certain area. So it's really just asking the government to take a position or make a change on a given issue.
Well, let me just steel man maybe someone who doesn't know very much about lobbying and who might think it's sort of institutionalized bribery or some kind of graft by industry upon politicians. And maybe that's the reason why people shy away from using that term lobbying. Can you explain why that's not the case?
Yeah, I don't think it's the case. I mean, certainly, you know, there are interests that probably everyone listening to this, people have different opinions, right? And so if you have, you know, somebody who is pro-choice that is lobbying for pro-choice policies, and you have someone that's pro-life, you're going to be, you know, offended that the other side of the issue is moving it forward. But I think that's, you know, very American, right? Like, it's sort of what makes the US interesting is that people can have debate and have different issues. I think there's often a lot of scrutiny around corporate lobbying. What's really interesting is there's actually like a tremendous amount of transparency around, you know, sort of the professional lobbying world. Like, I am a registered lobbyist. I have to file reports, you know, several times a year that on a quarterly basis that talk about, you know, all of the different issues that I've spoken about with members of Congress, and all of that is publicly available. And, you know, the amount of money that different companies spend or different causes spend on issues is all, you know, sort of filed away and publicly available. So, you know, the art of asking for change is very, I wouldn't say regulated, but there are a lot of disclosures that are required around it. You know,
So it's not like what you would expect in Thank You for Smoking. It's not.
I mean, it is a little bit. No, listen, there are a lot of people who are very passionate about what they believe in, and they work for nonprofits or associations or directly for companies, or, you know, maybe they've decided they want to participate in a lobbying activity just as sort of a one-off. You know, that is happening in Washington on a near daily basis. I think where there have been a lot of questions and where some people sort of scrutinize the process is on the political giving side. And so when I think of lobbying, we're going to talk about policy. We're going to talk about specific issues like we need a stablecoin bill or we need a market structure bill, and here are the provisions we think should be included in that. I think where a lot of people criticize sort of the entire process is on the political giving side. So if you're a member of Congress, you know, the House is up every 2 years for election and the Senate is up every 6 years for election. To run a campaign costs millions of dollars. I think the average House race is somewhere between $2 and $3 million, and Senate races can be quite expensive, you know, sometimes into the hundreds of millions of dollar range. And so you have to finance that somehow, right? And typically the way that's done is people contribute to their campaigns so that they can run ads, hire a campaign staff, et cetera. And so I think where a lot of the scrutiny comes in is, you know, how are corporations or unions or other, you know, sort of interest groups influencing the political process. And what's interesting there is there's actually a lot of transparency and disclosure around some part of that. If you look at crypto, for example, has a super PAC called Fair Shake. You can go online and you can see.
Didn't Coinbase help start that?
Yeah, it was the major three donors are Coinbase, Andreessen Horowitz, and Ripple. They made sizable contributions to Fair Shake in the last election, and they've already re-upped those contributions this election as well. It's not just those three companies. There are a lot of other firms that have contributed. There's a tremendous amount of transparency, right? Like I just listed off the major donors of Fair Shake. And if you go online, you can see, which races Fair Shake spent money. And I think that the most famous one is from this last cycle is Fair Shake spent $40 million posing Sherrod Brown and supporting Bernie Moreno. And Sherrod Brown was very anti-crypto and Bernie Moreno was very pro-crypto. And that was a big upset. And he lost. It was a huge win. And he was a very senior member who was the chairman of the Senate Banking Committee. So that is a big scalp for the wall. It's
the anti-crypto army is being dismembered.
Yes, exactly.
I definitely want to get into that for sure. Take me through the life of a registered lobbyist. What is a registered lobbyist day? Like what are you actually doing? Like you mentioned that an amateur lobbyist can come to Congress and try to speak to Congress people, for example, but there's some reason why they don't and why this industry of lobbying exists. So what's the lock-in there? What's the moat there? And what's the kind of day-to-day? Is it relationship building? Is it like what is the actual like dawn to dusk?
Yeah, I think for your typical registered lobbyist, probably not like my typical day, but for a typical registered lobbyist who isn't the head of a trade association, but who is solely focused on lobbying. I wear many hats. That is one of many hats I wear. But you probably start your morning maybe going to a breakfast or a coffee, or there's lots of meals and drinks and coffees in the lobbying world because it is a relationship building world. And so
and what motivates the politicians to go to the breakfasts? Who's at the breakfast and how did they get there and why?
Yeah, well, this gets back to the one before. Sometimes they're just social things, right? Like I may want to just casually meet someone for coffee and they're interested in learning about crypto and they want to build a relationship with me. But oftentimes these are fundraisers, right? This is where some of the criticism comes in is there's a lot of political giving, and a typical lobbyist might have some PAC dollars that they can donate to a congressperson. And so one of the trade-offs is you have these congresspeople who need to raise all of this money, and then you have these lobbyists who want to try to get in front of the congresspeople, their staffs, and anyone sort of in that orbit. And so they go in oftentimes and they'll attend fundraising breakfasts. But outside of that, people can also just meet up casually because they want to build relationships. When you're a staffer on the Hill or a member of Congress on the Hill, you want to meet the people who are working on these issues so you can get smarter about them. And so there is a lot of like non-fundraising socializing that goes on as well.
So you hit up the breakfast. So first you're at the breakfast.
Yeah, you hit up a breakfast, you get some information about the day. Typically you want to share that information, right? And so you will share that with your colleagues back at whatever firm or organization you work with. And then maybe you'll have a series of meetings on Capitol Hill. And so, you'll be up there, they talk about shoe leather lobbyists. That's because you walk around and you get 15,000 steps by the time
the whole word comes from like physically waiting in the lobby, right? Like that you're standing in the lobby. So
yes. But typically you have appointments that are set, and you'll go say, hey, the committee vote's coming up on the stablecoin issue. I've got an idea about a change to the bill, or maybe you're going to meet someone for the first time and you're just introducing yourself and walking through what your priorities are. And these happen in about 20 minutes, 30 minutes at a time. So you can spend a lot of time doing meetings like that. But then a lot of it too is not just translating whatever cause that you are advocating for to Congress. You often have to take what you learn from Congress and share that back with whoever has, sort of engaged you to be their lobbyist. And so it's sort of a two-way street of information sharing. But, you're not at your desk all day long. You're up a lot, you're walking around a lot, and it is very much a people business. A lot of times the lobbyists are like relationship specialists, and that can be very different than regulatory lawyers or sort of the policy professionals who are trying to figure out, okay, this is the exact solution we think we need. This is the exact language. That is oftentimes like sort of a different skill set. And so the lobbyists are sort of coordinating and working and helping to come up with the strategy to get those precise changes or issues. And you can have lobbyists that work on issues for 5, 7, 10 years, don't get any progress. Like the political alignment isn't right, or just their cause is just not one that, is sort of broadly shared by members of Congress. And so I think one of the interesting things about the crypto industry is in the 7 years I've been doing this work, nobody used to know what this is on Capitol Hill. And we have had this absolutely remarkable journey from being completely irrelevant to what is now, I think, the most powerful industry force in Washington, and one that, is very well positioned to get the policy changes that we've all been asking for so many years. Like we should finally be able to get those enacted this Congress.
I want to really dive into that zero to hero journey, but first take me through the rest of the lobbyists' day. So we've gone to breakfast. We're in these 20 to 30 minute meetings, maybe on Capitol Hill. Anything else you know about?
In the afternoon, you probably go back to your office, you're sharing information, and then there are a lot of happy hours in Washington. There are people who want to either, meet up for a fundraising dinner, or to go, at the Blockchain Association once every couple months, we host a happy hour so people can get together and socialize and meet. And so it's a relationship business. There are a lot of opportunities for people to get together, share information. And I think to outside observers, this all seems like sort of ridiculous, and it's difficult to pinpoint to like that exact like value you get out of it.
What part of it do you think feels ridiculous? Like the idea
I think a lot of people think this is just a bunch of people walking around and talking and socializing all day long. But when there's that key moment, when there is a vote that's about to happen, or there's a provision or something that needs to be changed, and you manage to get that one little fix that can like make or break a part of an industry, et cetera, that is because of all of the relationship building that has happened, and all of the education that has happened through that relationship building process that has like led to that one little fix or that one little phone call that can make a big difference. It's a interesting profession. I do think it kind of comes back to this like First Amendment right to petition the government. I think if we've seen what happened to crypto over the past couple of years, we were treated horribly as an industry, but it's because that we were organized. There are professionals on the ground that are doing the education, that the executives come to town and their time can be used efficiently to move the ball forward. That change didn't happen by accident. That change happened because a lot of people worked really hard to make it happen.
Let's talk about the zero to hero. So crypto is inherently not part of any country, not part of any government. It's agovernmental. It's a borderless movement. It's about maybe flouting some of those rules. It's about building an alternative system that's governed by code, not governed subjectively by people. When I started working in the space, the idea of government was maybe not anathema, but it was definitely, not the vibe. What changed? Tell me the story of how crypto got to Washington.
Yeah, well, I think it in the early days, it was very much that the crypto did not want to have anything to do with the government, but that wasn't the same feeling that the government had about crypto. I think particularly when Gary Gensler got there, but even before that,
the government wanted to take away people's Bitcoin, right? Like the government.
They wanted to take away people's Bitcoin. Yeah, they were going after self-hosted wallets. I mean, Trump in the first administration was not a fan of Bitcoin. And so even though I think crypto didn't want anything to do with the government was very concerned about crypto. There was a big lack of understanding. There were problems that crypto had to deal with, like it or not, with government. And I think, at first, when I started doing this 7 years ago, it was very difficult to get the CEOs of any of the major intermediary companies or any of the big projects, any of the founders. It was very difficult to get them to come and spend a few days in Washington.
What would they say when you invited them to Washington? What would crypto founders?
Yeah, they just said, it was exactly what you just said. Oh, I don't want to do that. I'm focused on building my network, or I'm focused on, contributing to this ecosystem, and, this isn't worth my time. But I think what people found is the first person that really tried to fill that void was Sam Bankman-Fried, and he did it in a very aggressive way. That guy was on the Hill more than I was on the Hill, and I'm a professional lobbyist. He was really aggressive in getting meetings and trying to push legislation that he wanted to get done. And I think that, when that all blew up and FTX blew up and SBF had been sort of the face of crypto in Washington, I think other CEOs and executives realized like they needed to step in. And now it is very common across the industry for senior executives to want to come to Washington, or to even build out their own teams in Washington to have a more consistent and constant presence. And so I think that's a fascinating story. Dramatically.
So SBF is the one that made all the difference. So
I think he made a lot of difference. Yeah.
So what did you think? So you were working on Capitol Hill. You were working on behalf of the crypto industry when SBF came to town. What did you think? I mean, he came in. He started doing things differently. What did you think was happening?
Yeah, first, whenever anybody shows up in Washington in crypto, especially back then, I was always like so excited because, it was difficult to get people to come to town. And so, I would meet with, he had some folks on his team from FTX in Washington, and I would, meet with them and say, hey, we should work together as an industry. FTX, you should join the Blockchain Association. Thankfully, they never did join the Blockchain Association, because after that sort of initial interest and excitement about them, wanting to engage in Washington, I learned very quickly that they had different interests than the rest of crypto. I think most people who are drawn to this space are drawn to some of the themes you were talking about earlier. They want to build something new. They want to find a better system. They believe in decentralization. They want to find a better way to do a lot of the services that we need to interact in the world today. That wasn't, sort of the vibe we got from FTX, right? Like Sam Bankman-Fried was very clear. Like he was just here to make as much money as possible, as fast as possible. And he was pushing, and supporting policies that very much advantaged FTX at the expense of the rest of the ecosystem.
Maybe you could be more specific about that, like lock in for CeFi as opposed to DeFi, right?
Right, exactly. This was kind of the first time that DeFi
regulatory capture. He was attempting regulatory capture by centralized finance like FTX at the expense of actual non-custodial DeFi.
Yes. And he was very supportive of legislation that would do that, was very aggressive in trying to move that quickly. And so, it became clear that he just wasn't on the same page as everybody else. And I think it was sort of this episode and then, FTX blew up that got everyone else involved in Washington and really sort of up-leveled where we're at. But I think what's most interesting in this journey is that not only did the industry just recover from FTX and from Sam Bankman-Fried, it came back at a level that most industries have ever achieved. I mean, we have a tremendous political force and political presence with our super PAC. We have a very, very engaged grassroots community, which I think goes back to, a lot of the sort of crypto Twitter roots. People are ready to take action and fight for their position and are willing to pick up the phone and call their member of Congress when asked. It's still a relatively lean presence of professional lobbyists and regulatory experts, but it's growing very quickly. And I think it's a very sort of sophisticated group of people that are working in this space. And so I think crypto is the most influential industry in Washington right now. I think, the test will be this year if we can get the good legislative fixes that we think need to be in place done. But yeah, it is a very, very powerful industry. So yeah, it went from zero to hero. I'm going to use that line.
How do we know that the current folks in Washington on behalf of the crypto industry are not motivated by attempting regulatory capture for their own businesses like Sam Bankman-Fried was?
I think it's very natural across almost every industry out there. There are always players that are sort of seeking that regulatory capture. But, I think if you think about it, there's only ever been like one bill out there that has been actually enacted, like a standalone crypto bill that has been signed by a president into law. And that was a bill that dealt with the IRS DeFi broker rule. So this was a rule that would have required, sort of non-custodial intermediaries to report tax reporting information to the IRS. It would basically force intermediaries where there are none. And I think the fact that we had a DeFi bill signed by the president shows that we're not going to have that Sam Bankman-Fried, let's focus on centralized entities versus DeFi. But yeah, I expect that we will see over time, there will be some efforts to do regulatory capture, but this is a theme that Congress is actually very familiar with. They may not know the inner workings of how crypto works, but they do understand regulatory capture. And there is an aversion to trying to do that. But, listen, anytime that rules are put into place, there are going to be those that are going to be better able to use them and those who are not. But I think it's really important that we lower the barriers to being able to comply with any rules that are needed. I think it's just a total non-starter that, if you want to, launch a token in the US, if you have to spend $20 million to do that, I think we've failed, right? We want to make sure that the rules are crystal clear, that, the cost of compliance with those rules are minimal, that we can have a lot of innovation here. And I think that most people in the crypto industry believe that. And I think also that you've got folks in Congress and I think in the White House that are not trying to pick favorites, but just trying to provide a level playing field for people to do their thing.
Let's talk about that a little bit, because you mentioned the sponsors behind Fairshake: Coinbase, Ripple,
A16Z. But there are many others too.
Right. So there are many others. So then Ripple becomes one of the cryptocurrencies, XRP, that's in the National Reserve, along with Solana, along with Bitcoin and Ethereum, along with Cardano. How did they get there? Can't you say that the administration is playing favorites with the project?
Yeah, that is, I think,
that sent them money or that funded campaign stuff?
Yeah, I think if you look at what Trump said versus what actually happened with the executive order, you sort of get two different things. Trump did do a tweet that named some very specific tokens, but when you look at the actual executive order, there are two pieces of it, right? There is a Bitcoin strategic reserve that is specific to Bitcoin, because I think everyone agrees Bitcoin is different. And then there's a digital asset stockpile. And so anything that is not Bitcoin that is seized, as part of, criminal or other investigations by the government will go into that stockpile. And then the Treasury Department can decide if they want to keep it or if they want to sell it. But yes, I think I would love to know more about the story about what, prompted Trump to do that. But I think that when you look at the actual policy, it doesn't favor any particular crypto token outside of Bitcoin. It really is for the digital asset stockpile. It's really just going to be what the government happens to stumble upon in the course of their investigations, and they'll be able to decide if they want to keep it or not.
So here's my question for you: if a project in crypto, let's call it a properly decentralized crypto values and ideals project, or not, if it decides that it's not going to lobby on behalf of its own interests, is it going to be at a disadvantage compared to another company that does talk to Donald Trump and the Trump campaign, or that does have lobbyists working for it? Or is it going to specifically be singled out to suffer because it wants to concentrate on building instead of Washington?
Yeah, no, I don't think it'll be singled out to suffer. As Blockchain Association, we're a trade association, so we represent 125 of our member companies in DC. And whenever we look at legislation or a bill, we're thinking about it from a whole of industry approach. There's also our friends at DeFi Education Fund that are looking at policy as it relates to DeFi from a whole of DeFi approach. Similarly, Coin Center is looking at everything from a software developer perspective. So I think there are a lot of people that are looking to make sure that regulatory capture isn't happening, that preference of certain tokens, aren't happening. But yeah, is it advantageous for large projects to represent their own interests and tell their own story? Like, I think so. I mean, I'm making a career change right now. I'm going from the Blockchain Association, and in a few weeks I'll be the president of the Solana Policy Institute. And Solana Policy Institute isn't there to get the government to buy Solana tokens, right? Or like that's not what we're here to do. No, that's not what we're here to do. We're here to make sure that policies are applied in a tech neutral way so that Solana can thrive. We also want to make sure that the Solana story is told directly because it is such a large ecosystem these days.
Wait, so Solana wouldn't support a story being circulated through Congress or a bill that is favorable to Solana but maybe disfavorable to Ethereum? It wouldn't be in support of something like that?
No, I think that is absolutely not what Solana Policy Institute is here to do. We want to make sure that it doesn't disadvantage Solana, certainly, but we're not looking to get an advantage over other ecosystems. We just want to make sure that whatever policies do happen take into account what's being built on Solana, and that it works for the Solana network. And so we have listen, I came from the Blockchain Association. Our CEO at Solana Policy Institute, Miller Whitehouse Levine, came from the DeFi Education Fund. Like, we care very much about the whole of ecosystem, but we also want to make sure that people understand Solana and that Solana has a voice in Washington. And so, I'm excited to be able to have that transition, but it's certainly not to be using the lobbying process to disadvantage, other ecosystems. I think the best way for ecosystems to compete is in the marketplace. And I think when we're looking at getting policies done in Washington, it needs to be something that works for, a vast majority of the participants in the broader crypto ecosystem, because that's that's the right way to do policy, and that's the way to do policy that's going to be lasting for a long time.
I want to get to the Solana transition and your career moves for sure, but maybe you mentioned the Blockchain Association, you mentioned trade associations versus lobbyists, you mentioned Coin Center. Maybe you can just give us the lay of the land of what organizations exist within the crypto trade association industry lobbying world and what each of their function is.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And I think that this is like incredibly confusing to a lot of people. So I'm glad you're asking this. So there are a lot of different organizations that work together or sometimes separately to help advance crypto policy in Washington. So Coin Center, for example, they are a 501c4 organization. They're independent. Their mission is to support the developers of software. They have civil liberties values that they care very much about. And I think of them often as sort of like a think tank, but they're also doing advocacy around their ideas. DeFi Education Fund is similar to Coin Center in that they are an independent organization that's just thinking generally about DeFi. It's very different than something like Blockchain Association, where we actually are a 501c6 trade association. And so we actually have member companies. And so whatever policies Blockchain Association comes up with is supposed to be reflective of the consensus of our membership. And so it's actually a lot easier to be working at like Coin Center or DeFi Education Fund because you can just kind of do what you think is right. Whereas at Blockchain Association, we have to find consensus. We have to get feedback from our members and figure out what they want, and then we can speak on behalf of the industry in that voice. But there are a couple other organizations that I think are key in this. One of them is Stand With Crypto. This is like an organization that helps individuals across the country weigh in with Congress. They have a lot of tools that allow people to email or to call senators or representatives or even federal agencies when there's a moment to do that. There's the Fair Shake Super PAC, which is, again, separate from all of this, but I think that they have a huge role to play in our influence in Washington. There's also kind of a lesser known organization called the Innovation Foundation. They do a lot of sort of candidate education and recruitment recruitment. So if you're not in Congress yet, but you want to be, and you are interested in maybe learning about crypto because you want to put something on your website about it, et cetera, CEDAR does a really good job at helping with that. And so, there's this sort of patchwork of nonprofit organizations that are at work in Washington. And then separately from that, though, there are individual companies that have lobbyists that are either in-house or they will hire a sort of a consulting firm to serve as their lobbyists. And so we now have a lot of crypto companies that have what is referred to as like a Washington office, where they, have representation on the ground that are engaging with government on a daily basis and kind of like a full-time capacity. What we do at Blockchain Association is we coordinate with all of these other groups, we coordinate with the industry, and there's a lot of coordinating going on at the Blockchain Association.
So you guys all together are sort of like the anti-crypto army.
Yes, we're the pro-crypto army. But yes, the anti-crypto army.
Did you ever see those guys in action? Did you ever see the anti-crypto army in action? So like,
No.
I imagine you guys as this force, the thing that you just described, or like this little force field. Did you ever see the enemies? I mean, now they're gone, right? They're dispersed.
Yeah.
How did that little thing work? Like, what was that?
Yeah. Well, what's really interesting is that like I've always said, there's no like upside to being anti-crypto. Elizabeth Warren seemed to think there was an upside.
Wasn't she being paid by someone to say that? I mean, people in crypto think, that she was being paid by the banks because they weren't sure what they wanted to do about crypto yet. But there was some reason. There must have been some reason why she was so against it.
If you're Elizabeth Warren, your sort of worldview is you think that the government has a very large role to play in individuals' lives. She says that she's against big tech and she says that she's against big banks, but if you think about it, big tech often does the bidding of government, right? As do big banks that we've seen with, Operation Choke Point 1.0 or 2.0, et cetera. Also, if you believe in like a big regulatory state, you want agencies, the banking agencies, the CFPB, the market regulators, you want them to be big and you want them to be strong and you want them to be able to have control. And what we're building in crypto threatens a lot of this, right? I mean, we're trying to build a different system, something that is more accessible for individuals, that has, more value for privacy, that doesn't rely on having these big, highly regulated intermediaries in the middle. And so I think the only thing that makes sense to me is that Elizabeth Warren sees crypto as a threat to the system that we have today, which she likes because the government has a lot of control over that system.
Why would anyone in government want to disempower themselves? Why?
Right.
Isn't that
like
what crypto is?
Yeah.
Isn't crypto a giant system for disempowering government? How could you convince government members that they should buy into a system that disempowers them? Like what? Say?
Yeah, I think what we've had is people within government. It's not constituents who are calling up their congressperson and saying, we got to get rid of this Bitcoin thing. No, the only people that call their Congress about Bitcoin are people who like Bitcoin, right? It's not for political reasons. I think it's for this sort of like, we're trying to disrupt the regulator themselves, right? And so I think it was a very sort of protective, sort of like deep state like reaction to like, hey, we need to keep our power, our control. They like intermediaries, right? Because they can regulate intermediaries, and the intermediaries often end up being the tools that help them to get their missions achieved. And so what the crypto industry has done, what the community has done, is come together and said, no, we want to build something different. And, we're going to be politically strong and politically active, and we're going to make our voice heard. And that has led, I think, to this sort of change of outlook that we've had in Washington, both with the Trump administration. But I think even the bigger win is we have a very strong bipartisan support in both the House and the Senate.
You were just talking about big government, small government. Government has a big role to play. Government has a small role to play. It sounds like something more socialist versus something more libertarian. And that does cut across party lines. So I guess I'm curious, are you concerned that crypto has become a partisan issue that's associated with the right?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's listen, the first Trump administration was anti-crypto. the Biden administration was very anti-crypto, and now Trump is pro-crypto. So we've had situations where from an executive branch administration standpoint, we've had a lot of people who didn't like us, but now Trump is kind of our guy, right? He's good. But when you go to Congress, you do get folks on both sides of the aisle.
Are there specific left or Democrat congressmen or senators that you would say are like really pro-crypto people, like people that maybe have used crypto or that are big advocates for it?
Yeah. I mean, I think in the Senate, probably one of the strongest ones there is Senator Kirsten Gillibrand from New York. There are a lot of crypto innovators in New York, a lot of jobs that are in New York. And I think she has taken a really, really thoughtful approach and view. And she's authored legislation that I think would really help provide the certainty that crypto needs. If you look on the House side, you've got Ro Khanna, you've got Richie Torres, there's a new guy, Sam Liccardo. You've got, I think we had 71 Democrats that voted for the DeFi broker rule. So it's very much growing on the Democratic side. And I think, like Democrats care about access to services. They care about reducing fees for consumers. I think there are a lot of themes of what people are doing in crypto that do resonate with Democrats. And I think that's why we're seeing the growth there. So I don't think everybody has that sort of like extreme Elizabeth Warren worldview within the Democratic Party. And I do think, Kamala Harris, there was a huge effort when she was running to try to get her to come around on crypto. And
there was. Were you part of
yes.
that? Were you part of trying to convert Kamala to crypto, and how did that go?
Yeah. So we did outreach to both campaigns. We were not, picking sides that phase. Part of our job as a trade association is to stay somewhat neutral and work with whoever's in power. But we did do outreach to both sides. The Harris campaign simply just did not believe that anyone cared about crypto. They did not believe in the crypto voter. Because, we would show them polling and saying like, no, this is like resonating with people. Like she should say something about this. And they just simply didn't believe it. Had her campaign been longer than the 3 months that it was, I think we eventually would have succeeded in getting to her. There were a lot of people in the crypto industry that were trying to get her to change her mind, but she did not. And I think, the Democratic Party is having some challenges right now, right? Like they're trying to figure out what they stand for. The Elizabeth Warren worldview is she got burned, right? Like she told everyone, trust me on this crypto stuff. She was working with Gary Gensler. At the end of the day, crypto ended up being a really strong force and one that I think, contributed to Donald Trump picking up votes because
Do you think Donald Trump got elected because of crypto?
I don't think he got elected because of crypto. I think a lot of people within the crypto industry were supportive of him when he started talking about crypto. I think people were kind of blown away. We'd been treated so poorly as an industry for so long, and to hear someone running for the president of the United States saying, like, hey, I want the US to be the crypto capital of the world was, really like shocking and exciting. But I think if Kamala had said the same thing, people would have also been excited about it. And so I don't think we're the reason Trump won. I think his messaging was one that I think appealed to, a majority of the voters, and that's why he is where he is. But I think it was broader than just the crypto issue itself.
When it comes to the midterms coming up, how decisive do you think the crypto vote is going to be? Do you think it's going to be the swing vote in a lot of tough contests?
It kind of comes in two forms, right? There's the political spending, right? So, there's crypto as an industry and community, our ability to help candidates who are pro-crypto, I think is really important. But then there's sort of this crypto voter piece. And we were seeing polling that 2 years ago that as much as like up to 20 to 30% of voters like were aware of a candidate's crypto position, and that was something they were considering. I mean, these were sort of like off the chart polling numbers at the time. And so I think that's only going to...
Compared to what's more normal? What's a more normal baseline?
Different people vote for different issues, and it can be, a very small percentage to a very large percentage. I think there's a range, but the fact that we had, 20% of voters that were, considering this as part of their decision, I think that's very large. And if you think about a lot of the swing states or some of these like Senate races that are very close, a few thousand votes one way or another can make a huge difference. And so if this is something that moves just a few thousand people one way or another, like it does matter. And so you don't need 100% of the crypto voters out there or voters out there to be voting voting, as a crypto voter. But if you have a small subset and that can swing a race one way or another, it can be very powerful. So I think, I think Congress is working really hard to get legislation done. And I think, hopefully we will see that all happen before the next election, but we're certainly going to want to make...
Before the midterms.
Yeah, I think we could see it before the midterms. I think,
give us a sense of what's brewing. What are you actually lobbying for day to day? What do you want that outcome to be? What do you want to actually happen? Give us the high level.
Yeah, I think the first part of the year has been focused on undoing all of the bad policies that went into place, right? Like we saw the repeal of the SAB 121 accounting guidance. We saw the repeal of a lot of the interpretive letters and guidance around Choke Point 2.0 and the debanking problem. We've seen a lot of the litigation that the SEC was doing dismissed with prejudice, which means that they can't bring it back at a future date. And so we've had to undo the bad policies, and now it's putting the good policies into place. And some of that can actually happen directly at like the SEC. They do have some authority today to take some action, and they're thinking through a lot of those issues, and they're holding roundtables to become educated. And they've been very transparent about who they're meeting with, and it's been a very open and accessible process. But on Congress, there are a couple gaps in the federal law. And so we need Congress to pass legislation so that the agencies have the right authorities to do what needs to be done. One of those is with stablecoins. It's finding a way for stablecoins to be regulated at the federal level, and then also what we call market structure. And so this is kind of, figuring out, which market participants have risks and how do we want to regulate to make sure those are mitigated, what disclosures are needed in order to, inform people who are investing in or purchasing tokens, like what's needed there. And I think most importantly for the industry is, how are we describing tokens? What is the taxonomy? When is something a security? When is something not a security? Because that's going to dictate how their markets are regulated.
What's the actual role of, for example, the Blockchain Association or maybe something like Coin Center? What exactly are you doing to these bills or to this legislation in order to make sure it's good and that it actually benefits the industry, that it avoids mistakes, that it avoids onerous provisions?
Yeah. So if you take something like the stablecoin bill, we'll get a draft of that legislation, right? The committee will send us a draft, or they'll post it online publicly, and they'll be like, what does the industry think about this? What we'll do is we'll go in, we'll read that bill, we'll analyze it. We'll be like, we think that part doesn't work because we've talked to folks in the past about that, et cetera. We'll convene our members. We'll share with them the language. Everyone takes some time to think about it. And then we will compile recommendations that we then take back to Capitol Hill, to the bill's authors, and say, hey, we think like you intended this, but we're reading it like this way. Can we get it back to what we think is closer to the intention? Or like, hey, we want to strike this entirely. That's just not workable. Or like, maybe, hey, can we add something? And so it's really like getting into the weeds and then working with the industry to figure out, what works, what doesn't work, and then, trying to get those changes enacted. And, sometimes they take our ideas and sometimes they don't. Sometimes they say, we're intending something different, and, that sort of is what it is. But a lot of times, it's a complex space. They want to make sure that the industry isn't unduly like burdened by the regulation, but that the regulation is solving or mitigating a risk that's out there, that will make the market better and stronger. And so, they definitely do the drafting, but they also take a lot of feedback, and that's part of the reason you want to have those relationships in place, is so when these moments come, you can have a good dialogue and be in the room and be at the table when the decisions are made.
So we have this executive administration that signaled that they understand what crypto is. But as far as the Senate, as far as the Congress, the average age skews really old. And there are very few people that come from engineering backgrounds. A lot of people are lawyers. Some people are other kinds of professionals. A lot of career politicians. How many of these people understand anything about computers, understand anything about crypto? How many of these people maybe have performed a crypto transaction themselves?
Yeah, I mean, it varies. I think particularly with the younger members of Congress, they tend to just be more digitally native, and they tend to understand crypto themselves.
If you had to guess how many members of Congress have directly handled crypto themselves, 5, 6?
Oh no, I think it's more than that. I think it's probably closer to like 50 or 60.
Wow.
I think there are more than that actually, might understand things theoretically, but they haven't, maybe like, you know, downloaded a self-hosted wallet and done a peer-to-peer transaction or
Mhm.
played around with DeFi or something like that. But no, I think there's actually a growing number. And a lot of that was because, we had a lot of candidates last year that became interested in crypto, and it's the new folks that have showed up, right? Like a lot of them have tried this out. Yeah, I think it's a growing number. And then obviously I think as the user adoption continues, I think that, that's going to only increase over time. I do think, interestingly, in this past election cycle, there were a lot of folks that maybe they weren't handling crypto themselves, but I can tell you a lot of these candidates were looking at Polymarket on a daily basis. And so
Mm.
that's kind of an interesting example of,
Were they placing
something
bets?
that I don't think they were placing bets, but I think they just wanted to see what it was predicting, especially if they were covering, their own
So
congressional
they were
race.
definitely
So
hitting refresh on home,
yes,
if not
yes,
placing bets.
yeah.
Let's talk about your career transition. So, after many years advocating for the industry in general, you've chosen to focus on a specific ecosystem. What was it about Solana that grabbed you?
Yeah, well, I think it's a couple of different things. I think a lot of what I've enjoyed doing has been around, the developers and the builders, and I think there's a lot of that activity happening right now on Solana. And so to be able to focus and go a little bit more deeper on that part of the industry, as opposed to like, the exchanges or the trading firms or, sort of other intermediaries was very interesting to me. But a lot of it is also just sort of personal. The CEO of Solana Policy Institute, Miller Whitehouse Levine, I actually hired him many years ago, and now he hired me. So a little bit of role reversal. He and I have worked together really well in the past and have always wanted to find an opportunity to work together again. And so when this came up and he approached me, it was very difficult to say no. But I do think the blockchain association and the crypto industry, as we've been talking about, are incredibly strong. And I think there have been moments throughout the past 7 years of me being in this role that if I had left, it all would have sort of fallen apart because it wasn't strong. It wasn't fully built out yet. But we have a really, an amazing team. We have about 20 people on the ground in Washington. We have 125 member companies. Like this is a very strong organization, and I think I've sort of done all that I could do with it. Like I think it's time for someone else to come in and hopefully bring it to the next level. And it just seemed like a good moment with things going so well in Washington to make that move.
So, last question. You're a bridge between worlds. What's one thing that you wish the crypto community understood about Washington? And what's one thing you wish Washington understood about crypto?
Oh, that's interesting. I mean, I think the one thing I wish crypto understood about Washington has actually happened, and that is the fact that you can be a part of the conversation, that you can come to town. There's a lot of, you don't have to open up a Washington office and hire 10 people in order to have an impact. You can spend one day a year coming and telling your stories about what you're building on Capitol Hill, and that helps contribute to this like broader effort. It really is like a community effort, right? Because when Coinbase is going in and lobbying an office, and we go in and lobby another office, and both of those offices end up voting in favor, that benefits both of us, right? And so even spending one day a year in Washington can have a huge impact, and it is part of a community effort. I think the one thing that I would want folks on Capitol Hill or within the government to know about crypto is that, and I think we've also started to address this, is that this is largely a really good community of people that are trying to build things to change the world. I think, the Sam Bankman-Frieds are outliers. Like this is mostly like people are drawn to this for, they're very passionate. Like they're doing this because they believe that we can do better than what we have today. And there's a lot of cool things that we can do with crypto today, but I think, we're just scratching the surface, right? Like there's a lot of development underway, and that if we do this right, this is going to be something that benefits individuals, businesses, people around the world. Like this is, we're still in the early days, and that, we want Congress to appreciate what the goals are here and to help us find the right framework, so that we can achieve those goals.
Beautiful. I think that's a lovely place to wrap. Thanks so much, Kristin. Appreciate your being on.
Thanks, Amanda.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Endgame. Please follow me on X, Amanda Cassett, 2 S's, 2 T's. Follow the company I founded, Serotonin HQ, and listen wherever you get your podcasts: YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, the works.